And it's an honor to moderate a session with a focus on products for children. I'm thankful for our speakers, for all of the sponsors, and for each of you for being here. Let's see if I can get this to work. Oh, there we go. So, since you're here, you probably have a little interest in pediatric care. So why focus on products for children in Utah? Well, we have the highest number of children per family in the country. We also have a high birth rate, so we will likely sustain that distinction. Utah is a bit of an outlier. 28% of the population is less than or equal to 19 or 18 years of age. The average is 22% in the nation, with a range of 19 to 25% if you exclude Utah. So, having a large population of children doesn't necessarily mean that Utah is doing its part to advance this aspect of pediatric care. I hope that our companies in Utah and the care providers will overcome challenges and that they will be able to put into effect the opportunities that we will discuss today. So, I'm going backwards. I'm so sorry. So, we'll begin today by hearing from Dr. Espinoza and Dr. Coe. They will discuss and present some of their insights into pediatric device development. They are national experts. We're so fortunate to have them here. They direct 2 of the FDA-sponsored pediatric device consortia that have been funded to increase the number of medical products and devices that are designed and approved specifically for children. We are also fortunate to have 2 local experts who will talk about their experience developing products for children in Utah. Dr. Ann Blaschke will talk about her experience with developing viral tests with the University of Utah and BioUtah. And Dr. Jones will talk about his experience with Owlet and the vast amount of data that they're collecting on children and how they plan to use that in the future. So after our speakers have spoken, we'll hopefully have some time for some comments and questions from you. And like with the last session, either Kelvin Colomer or I will bring the microphone out to you. If you. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you so much, Ron, and thank you everyone for having us here. We'll do the slides for Juan Espinoza. That'd be great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. We really appreciate your time and your attention to this really critical area, which is pediatric medical devices. My name is Juan Espinoza. I'm a pediatrician by training. My day job is I'm the Chief Research Informatics Officer at Lurie Children's Hospital in Chicago, and I am the PI of CTIP, the Consortium for Technology Innovation in Pediatrics. We are, as Ron mentioned, one of the 5, wrong slide deck. One of the 5, Espinoza, E-S-P-I-N-O-Z-A. Thank you. One of the 5 FDA-funded consortia. The CTIP program started at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. So fun fact, when Chester was at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, he was part of the initial group that started CTIP before he left to go to Texas and eventually start a PDC there. It was then run by Yaniv Bar-Cohen, and then I took over in 2018. And then we were lucky enough to recently be refunded by the FDA. These are my disclosures. So this is our latest consortia. We're incredibly lucky to have 25 organizations across 8 states that are helping us join in our mission to advance pediatric medical device accelerator solutions from concept to commercialization. In terms of what we do, just to give you a small window into our world is we are constantly engaging with the medtech community through our website, through social media, through referrals, through funding opportunity announcements, through meetings like this. We identify and source new pediatric medical device projects and companies. They go through our evaluation and strategy development process. They then get invited to join our portfolio. And then once those companies are in our portfolio, they're available to receive a number of benefits, including direct services, help with building partnerships, indirect funding support, so that's where we pay for services on their behalf, or direct device funding, which is where we write checks to them. In addition to that, we put on education opportunities and events. We do advocacy and communication, and we do quite a bit of research. And we've developed a model for a medical device clinical trials unit to help bridge that really critical role, which is how do you generate the evidence necessary from a regulatory perspective to get these devices across the market. This is just to give you a sense of what we do. We've had over 144 projects in our portfolio, raised about $500 million, and 19 products on the market so far. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. We're here to talk about this. There is a major health inequity in this country that we don't really talk about, and it's the fact that we do not build pediatric medical devices specifically for children. And the research on this is pretty conclusive. The availability and sophistication of devices for children lag by about 10 years compared to adults. When we look at the highest risk devices, PMAs and HDEs, only about 10 to 20% of them are pediatric, which the FDA defines as up to 22 years of age. Many of those that count in pediatric are actually, say, 18 and older or 21 and older, but because they're under 22, they get counted in the pediatric area. If you look at ones that are actually intended for children and infants, it's less than 5%. So that means that most pediatric devices end up being used off-label with little or no safety data. That means inherently that the risk-benefit ratio for children is very different than that for adults. There are no requirements related to pediatric labeling, and there's really almost no incentive to really focus on developing pediatric devices. To put it in context, we spend about $17 trillion a year in healthcare, and children represent about a quarter of the US population, but we spend less than 10% of that $17 trillion on children. Unless you think that that's because children are healthier, it's actually, part of it is because pediatric hospitals, providers, and devices are reimbursed or compensated at 50 to 70% of what we pay for adult care. So we systematically underfund pediatric healthcare in this country. And when we think about pediatric devices, it is a textbook example of a market failure, right? You have this clear and overwhelming public need, but there's high perceived risk, low anticipated returns, therefore there's low investment, which results in low innovation and production. So it's a problem of investment, coordination, incentivization, and regulation. Why are there these barriers? And this image of a traffic jam in Bangkok is kind of what it feels like to work in pediatric medical devices. There are scientific challenges, engineering ones, ethical, regulatory, financial, political from a regulation and legal standpoint. Very broadly, when we think about scientific and engineering challenges, children are not little adults. They are physiologically different. The nephron of a 6-month-old works different than that of a 2-year-old, that works different than that of a 12-year-old, which works different than that of a 30-year-old. So at the molecular level, pediatric patients have different needs. They are anatomically different. You can't just miniaturize all technologies. For some technologies, you reach a threshold where miniaturization is no longer possible, and now you have to think about a different scientific approach. Children grow, if we're doing things correctly, which means that if you implant a device that doesn't grow with them, you now need a second device or a third device. And growing devices over time are complicated. There's also time. Most of the devices and implantables that we develop, we sort of give them a shelf life of 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, because that heart valve is going in somebody who's 70. But what about a heart valve that goes in someone who's 7? That valve now has to last an entire lifetime. Is it actually able to do that? And then we get into complex things like, well, materials may not leach in 5 to 10 years, but might that material leach over 50 years? Might it leach over 70 years? How do we even learn that? So there's a lot of complexity that's specific to children. There are also ethical challenges. Children are a protected group. This is codified in law, in HIPAA, in the Code of Federal Regulation. And so it can be more complex to do testing on vulnerable populations. How do you define safety? And how do you make those considerations in vulnerable populations? There's also just the additional complexity of informed consent, right? You have to consent not just the parent or the guardian. You have to get assent from the child within a certain age group. You have to get consent from them if they're a little bit older. So it just gets the whole patient recruitment process is also more complicated. There are a number of regulatory challenges. There are no pediatric-specific regulatory pathways in the United States. So every pediatric device has to go through a process that was designed and tested for adult innovation. So every pediatric device trial ends up being their pivotal trial. These companies are much smaller. They have less money. They have limited budgets, which usually means they can only afford one study, and they have to try to meet these strict regulatory requirements, ideally for multiple agencies through a single study, which can be quite burdensome and complex. And then, again, the financial challenges. So most devices, if you look at, there's not great data on this because, as you can imagine, not a lot of companies want to share this information, but to the extent that there is publicly available data on this, Class 2 devices can take $10 to $30 million. Class 3 devices, $100 million or more. It's 3 to 10 years from concept to commercialization. If you're looking at a VC market, VC group who's expecting, a 5 to 7x return on investment within 2 to 3 years, that's not pediatrics. It's not happening. And again, it goes back to, that's from the private side. From the public side, again, NIH budget is around $30 billion. The NICHD, the National Institute for Child Health and Development, is $1.3 billion, so less than 5%. All pediatric research across all institutes is about 12%. Congress has known this since 1995 when they said the NIH did not spend any money, except that those numbers are from 2019. So not really making progress. But there are opportunities. One of them is regulatory innovation. How do we work with the FDA, work with academia, work with industry to define pediatric-specific pathways that help accelerate innovation for children? Real-world evidence through NEST is another really exciting opportunity where we can at least take off-label use of adult devices and build the appropriate set of regulatory quality evidence to get approvals and indications and appropriate risk safety profiles for children. The Pediatric Device Consortia that Chester and I are a part of have made, I think, hopefully important contributions to the field. And then ShipMD, which was first created by Vassim Paris at CDRH. He's the medical director for pediatrics and special populations, and it's this concept of a public-private partnership, a national network and ecosystem that I think is going to be probably ideally a turning point for how we develop devices in this country. And then good old advocacy. The handful of things that we've made progress on in pediatrics has been through actions of Congress. The FDA does not have statutory power. Congress is required to pass laws, and then the FDA can make legally binding regulation. But it has to start with Congress, which means that it starts with advocacy for us to change how we regulate pediatric devices in this country. With that, I'll stop for now, and I'll let Chester chat.
Thank you very much. Slides for Chester Co, please. I want to say thank you very much for the kind invitation. My name is Chester Co. I'm a pediatric urologist at Texas Children's, as well as a professor at Baylor College of Medicine. There are many similarities to my pathway in terms of being from Texas. Very much like in Utah, there are a lot of Californians that have moved there. So I moved there about 10 years ago. We also are a very young state. We have a lot of children in Texas. We unfortunately have problems. A quarter of the population does have insurance. So I do think we have some similarities, some differences, but I really want to thank everyone for being in the room, for having interest in pediatric devices. I think that's what Juan and I and many others have really been proposing is that there needs to be more attention paid to pediatric devices because there's a real need. I'm just going to quickly go through some of the slides. We're going to skip a lot of them. But I probably will concentrate more on some of the opportunities, and really the opportunities are really on the people aspect, and that's probably where I spend most of my time, is that I do think that this is a viable area. You can call it clinically friendly research. I think that's one way to get more pediatric devices towards children. Down, okay. Okay, so just a little bit about Texas Medical Center, where I'm from. That's where Texas Children's, MD Anderson, Baylor College of Medicine. This is the largest medical city in the world. We do say we're the biggest of many things. Texas Children's Hospital is the largest children's hospital in the U.S. with over 1,000 beds. I am still a practicing surgeon, trying to do the surgeon-scientist deal still. I see a lot of kids, do a lot of surgery. My area is robotic surgery, especially in kids. But this is a prominent area. This is one aspect of doing robotic surgery. Again, small incisions do the same surgery you do with open. But this is also where the pediatric device needs come into play, in that we still have technological gaps. We don't have the devices we need. This is one area where Intuitive Surgical, the most prominent robot on the market now, discontinued their 5 millimeter instruments, and the model with those instruments no longer exists or will no longer exist as of next year. So we have this shortfall in pediatric devices available for kids, as Juan has mentioned. You know, we lag adult devices by 10 years. The market-based approach doesn't work for us. We do more mission-based work, because the economics just don't work well. Again, thank you for being in the room, because we know that this is not profit-driven, but it is important because kids need these type of devices. So what we have to do, we have to stay within children's hospitals and academics longer to de-risk further, because we just can't survive on the outside. Juan mentioned CTIP. It's a pleasure to be part of co-founding of that quite a long time ago. Since I moved to Texas Children's, we built a second one, and that's where CTIP is. Our primary is at Texas Children's and Baylor College of Medicine, but also includes Texas A&M, Rice, University of Houston, and then Phantom dropped out, but we've had the University of Minnesota become the Southwest Midwest Consortium. And a little bit about what we do, very similar to Juan. We help out innovators throughout the country. We provide seed funding, provide consultant help, such as regulatory consultants. We want to help innovators build better devices for kids because we know that they need the help. A little bit of summary, similar to Juan, our innovators are able to raise additional funding as well as get assistance and build those devices so we get the kids eventually into the clinics. We have about $350,000 a year. Our company has raised over $200 million over that time with that small amount of funding. Just a little bit similar to Juan, we help all the way from concept to commercialization, a lot of the early work, given the amount of funding that we can give, but we need to get them to the prototype, to the preclinical stage, hopefully eventually the commercialization stage and clinical stages as well. Some of the things that we do in terms of helping physicians understand that this is a viable pathway for them to do research. You may have heard a lot in the hospitals about burnout and the need for wellness. I think this is a viable pathway to address that. And this is what I'm promoting, this clinically friendly research, that you can do this research, still stay academically active, but also able to keep a busy clinical career, treat patients, which I think what our first love is always going to be, is helping patients get better, but it will do that in an academic setting. And there are actually one of the things that help to do academic research is have funding. And the SBI or STTR grant program, which I think many may be familiar with, but I tell you that most physicians who trained in academics are not familiar with this. They need to know about some of these programs, which are really more for device development and technological advancement that they're not used to seeing. They're used to typical R grants for running their own basic science lab. And I'm not saying that that's not important. We do need the basic science. We do need the science to help move our device development forward. But this is another aspect that can be funded with non-dilutive funding from the government. Some of the ways that we give out funding through a lot of pitch competitions. We partner with competitions to give a pediatric device-specific prize. This is great, non-dilutive funding. I sometimes feel like Santa Claus giving a lot of money out to others such that they can build their better devices. They love talking to me, so I'm happy to talk to you as well. But there's one way that we can help spur the process so that more people spend time in this area. We give a couple of prizes through the AEP section on urology, as well as through the AEP section on advances in therapies and technology. If you don't know about the SOAT, or the right-sided section, this is actually a section within American Pediatrics from which you can be a member. This is the one area that some from industry can join and have access to contacts with pediatricians, especially since American Pediatrics has such a prominent voice on the Hill, as well as all the clinical experience that's in that room as well. This includes Ron Day's device, who won Blow by Oxygen in 2021, funding from us. Going back to the whole clinical friendly research, I spend a lot of time in hospitals. I meet a lot of physicians. I ran the fellowship program for about 10 years in pediatric urology, but I've seen a lot of our fellows interested in basic science research in the past, but I do see that this is one area where they can make a difference, that they can spend the time being the surgeons to take care of patients, which is, I think, what our primary goals have always been from the very beginning, but they can stay within the academics. They can still get the papers published. They can still get the grants and still be promoted, staying within academics. Again, we have to stay within academics longer to get our devices developed. And this is one way. So Kunshes is our past fellow, is assistant professor at Stanford. We built a magnetic renal stent removal device. We did get that to SBR phase 1. And this is an aspect, we didn't know some of the magnetic forces needed to do that type of device, and we found that is so challenging because of the amount of magnetic forces needed to do it, 4 newtons. So we had some challenges. We didn't know that wasn't available in literature, but we now know it's available now. I'm almost done here. So, but maybe I can just summarize here. We do, I guess the message is being somewhat of an educational session is that we're into people, helping people stay within pediatric devices. We do need more of them. But as some of the messages that Juan had presented is that pediatric devices needs the help. But remember, we are not adult devices, we are not drugs, we are not even orphan drugs, that we need a different pathway to follow. So just remember that all the things that you may know about devices and biotechnology development, unfortunately we can't use. So that's some of the message that we try to get across, is that we need a little bit different pathway. And some of the ways that we're able to do that are with some of the national ecosystems that are being built now, such as Juan mentioned, SHIP-MD, which is now being taken over by the foundation NIH. They have a great track record of building public-private partnerships, for example, for Alzheimer's, this perfect slide, for Alzheimer's drugs, great timing, for Alzheimer's drugs and vaccine development, they've taken this on as well. So if you go to the FNIH.org/PMD website, you'll see that they're in the design phase for building that public-private partnership. And I think this is really Vasoom Pierce's brainchild. So he is the chief pediatrics officer at CDRH, reports to Jeff Shuren. This is really taking it from way, which is just an idea, to now where hopefully it has legs to become an established public-private partnership that will help pediatric devices move to the next step, so we have many more of them available for our patients. And so with that, maybe just to conclude that we want to keep innovating for kids. We know that we have to stay within the academic structure longer, but remember, our physicians and providers need some of the academic parameters to stay within that. That's publications, grant funding, promotions. And again, we have these national programs, which is much better than it was 10, 20 years ago to help move us forward. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for the kind of invitation, and look forward to speaking to you later. I'd like to turn over to Ann for your step.
Thanks. Thanks, Chester. And actually, your talk is a great lead-in to what I'm going to talk about, which is the partnership, the academic industry partnership between BioFire and the Department of Pediatrics and Pediatric Infectious Disease. So we started working with BioFire, which I will probably slip and call Idaho Technology most of the time because that's who they were when I was working with them. But they reached out in now about almost 20 years ago to us as they were looking to move from their work in military device development into clinical diagnostics. And this was around 2004, around the time of SARS-1, so if we remember SARS-1. And so at that time, it looked like a good area to get into was respiratory diagnostics. And so Idaho Technology had a new platform that they were developing that could look for not only SARS, but could look for other respiratory viruses. And so in looking for clinical collaborators, what they found was that in pediatrics, we're actually already doing multiplex viral testing, although we were doing it with a much more unwieldy platform. So we were using direct antibody fluorescence testing, which was difficult in the lab and difficult to have people trained for. And so when we heard that this was something they were interested in developing, we were really excited about being part of development for a PCR-based multiplex respiratory viral testing. And so together, the scientists at Idaho Technology, along with a faculty member in pediatric infectious disease, Dr. Cory Jones, wrote a grant. So academics wrote a grant to start the development of this technology. I was part of the Division of Pediatric Infectious Diseases at the time. I was a new faculty member, and so this ended up becoming my academic project for my career. So Ron asked me to think about sort of why this was a successful collaboration. And so, you know, when I really thought about it, I think that what made it really successful was the partnership. So we were really close collaborative partners, both my division and the scientists at Idaho Technology developing the film array system. So for my part, I had a K award, so an NIH Career Development Award that allowed me to work at Idaho Technology. So I had a bench and I had a desk and I went to all the meetings. And together I wrote grants with those scientists. Others in my division wrote grants with the scientists. We thought through the panels and what would be useful clinically. We wrote academic papers, we presented at meetings, and I think we were really clinical champions for the technology even before it was ready to go. So I think that was really helpful in making it successful. And I think this story is a little bit different because, of course, the film array platform is not a pediatric-specific device, but it's a device that was developed primarily in collaboration with pediatricians and has thus become a device that's really useful both for children and for adults, and it's been obviously very successful. And I think, as you mentioned, Chester, in terms of burnout and excitement, you know, it was really great as a clinician to be working with a device development company and being able to see our ideas be brought forth into medical devices, and now I can order it for my patients in the hospital, and that's really great. So I think that's what I'd like to say about that.
I'm Cory. I'm lead of the data science team at Owlet Care. We started about 10 years ago. A group of dads got together and said, "Hey, we're about to have our first kid. How do we make sure that they're safe when we're asleep?" Right? There's that anxiety of parents of SIDS and SUIDs, and to them, this was before I joined, but the simplest and most straightforward approach was to look at pulse oximetry and say, if we can just monitor oxygen and pulse rate, and notify if things are out of bounds, then maybe that will help us know what's going on. And so they started it as a consumer product, and for 5 or 7 years, continued to sell that as a consumer product before the FDA came in and said, "Hey, this is a medical device." And one of the things that we struggled with at the time is we looked at the FDA as a foe when we first started. As I joined about 5 years ago and went through this, it was they're making us not be able to do what we want to do, so kind of clashed a little bit. When we finally accepted looking at the FDA as a partnership about 2 years ago, when we were forced to stop selling it as we had been selling it and adapt to making it a medical device, we've gone through a lot of the same things that Juan talked about with developing a pediatric device of what is the path for getting this approved? How do you test on babies? that aren't just small adults, right? So we've had a lot of collaboration with academic institutions. UCSF was one of our groups that we worked with, where we would go and we would take our pulse oximeter, we'd put it on adult thumbs, we'd lower their oxygen and take blood draws. The problem is, as Juan talked about, that's a different physiology, that's a different vasculature than you experience on an infant foot, where our device is generally placed. And so how do you take that and show accuracy? Well, we're accurate on an adult. Well, how do you show the FDA that, but yes, it's also accurate on an infant as a result? So we've done additional studies with the University of Utah, with the University of Alabama at Birmingham, where we would put it on babies in the NICU who were being monitored anyway and sometimes have lower oxygen. Again, this is a good approximation, but where we're targeting 1 to 18-month healthy babies, these really small, really tiny NICU babies weren't a perfect approximation. So one of the things that we had to do in going through the FDA clearance process, working with these other institutions to get all this data, was to kind of present a totality of data and skirt around the issue. And so if we can find ways to work directly with the FDA and partnership, and as we've created more of a partnership with them, it's been helpful to have them understand some of the difficulties we have in doing that development, also have us understand sort of where they're coming from on getting those accuracy numbers. So it has been a process of learning along the way. I think we've, at Owlet, feel like we've got a good partnership with the FDA in developing that, and we got clearance for a prescription device back in June, and as was announced this morning here, we also just recently got clearance for our over-the-counter device. So it's been a 10-year process of back and forth of fighting some headwinds as far as what's appropriate, what's right, but to finally have that success has been super exciting and a relief, and to see some of the stories that parents tell us of using our product and how it's helped them. Even stories from doctors of, hey, we were skeptical of these devices, but we've seen how it's accurate. It's been really exciting and encouraging for us to continue to push forward. But finding that funding, finding that approximation of how do you test on these infants that again, you can't get their consent doing certain tests. It's not appropriate or ethical to do these tests, right? So how do you do that? And we're still learning and growing, and appreciate for people like Juan and others that are helping to pave the way to make that better. And again, working with academic institutions that have some of those resources, right? The advantage of working with the University of Utah, UAB, they have medical centers where they have regular patients coming in, which with Owlet Baby Care, even though we say baby care, we don't actually have any babies that we take care of at work each day, right? We're just trying to create products that help the babies. And so having those resources and those partnerships has been a super helpful process of getting through things.
Unless anyone from the FDA... No, there we go. I was going to say, and lest anyone from the FDA be listening, I'm sure Owlet didn't skirt around those issues. You put together a comprehensive portfolio of evidence from various sources that in their totality provided appropriate evidence for your clearance.
Yes, that's a better way to say it. We didn't skirt around the issues. We worked with the FDA. It was a collaboration to find the best. But ultimately, right, our final data, we didn't have blood draws matching the oxygen levels of infants because it's not ethical or appropriate to do, right? So we had to find the totality of data surrounding it that showed that yes, it is accurate even in that population.
Just that, I think many believe that the FDA is working better now than it has been in the past. I mean, we all remember a time when it was very tough to work with them, but at least the ones that work in pediatric devices, another reason to stay in pediatric devices, they want to work with you to help make better pediatric devices. So we're going to hear a push from us to spend more time in the space, and that's one of the reasons.
Yeah, and looking at them as partners instead of a foe has really opens up many more opportunities.
Right. And if I could just add on comment to Ann, I do think this is definitely a viable way for physicians and providers and others to spend time in the space, especially staying within academics. But I do think it's a great win-win for those who are in the business side, because we're busy clinicians. Most of us don't want to leave our day jobs. So I think it's a great opportunity to build businesses off of this. And this is not something that most of us are able to leave that, because we still have mortgages to pay and bills to pay. But I do think that this is a way for a great partnership to occur, and we want to give it up. I think most want to give it up. They may think they want to keep it. That's one thing I tell physicians a lot. You just got to give it up to a specialist who can take it to the next step and build a viable business from this. But none of us are probably going to quit our day jobs for it.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think that I'll put hats off to Idaho Technology, who really was collaborative with us in our academic endeavors. And so we were able to write papers, we were able to use the technology before it was FDA approved for research purposes, and so do some of the studies that we were really interested in with epidemiology. We wrote a grant with the CDC where the technology was used as part of those studies. And so it was really academically beneficial for us as well. Our faculty, including myself, were supported by the grants that we wrote together, including we had several SBIRs, UO1s, and so I think it was really great for all of us, and a really fun time to work with them.
And maybe just to add on that, from the business side of things, working with the academic institutions, right? We were able to benefit from the academic institution's expertise in recruiting and writing those IRBs and getting those grants and things put together that we don't have the experience in, right? So we, looking to build a business and build these products, but doing that clinical research, building out the expertise from those partnerships was a huge benefit to us.
Great. Thank you very much. Can we give them a round of applause? And we have some time for some questions or comments. Don't be shy.
My name is Mark Ports. I'm at Co-Diagnostics, and I actually worked with Ann on the development of the film array. And so that was an example of I approached first Kerry Byington and then worked with Ann, and that was a collaboration over many years. But more recently, maybe that was just luck or it was the right people, but more recently, from other companies, I found it harder to find the time, the academics to find the time to, if I cold call them. And so I want to ask your advice. What are the tripwires that the professors see as I don't want to be involved? And in particular, if I come to you and say, you have a hammer, I have nails that I can't hammer particularly well. You're using it for a slightly different purpose, but could you think about it for our application? But it just seems like, you guys are even busier than people in companies, but what are the tricks to get engaged?
Well, I'm happy to provide some. So I think you're right. I think clinicians are busier than ever, and I think academic institutions are more complex and bureaucratic than ever. And so it's not as easy as I'm going to look up this person, I'm going to just cold call them and send them an email and see if we can start a partnership. Great, did you talk to the tech transfer office? Do you talk to a professional engagement service? Did you talk to this? There's a bunch of offices and teams that are involved now, and I think, for better or worse, I do think that that's the best way to do those engagements now. Having been on the other side of those conversations, there's no shortage of emails among staff, say in a tech transfer office or industry engagement office, are just ugh, I had another faculty member basically negotiate a contract without even talking to me. Right? And then those become impediments. Even if it's a good business opportunity, it's just hard because it didn't follow the proper procedures. So what I would encourage the industry is almost every single pediatric institution, academic medical center has either a tech transfer office, an innovation program, or an industry engagement office. And start there with a suggestion of, I've heard that Dr. Chester Koh is an eminent urologist at your institution. We'd love to partner with him on this opportunity. Could you make that introduction? Or through programs like ours, like the PDCs and the drug development side. There's also the pediatric. There's a pediatric network for drug development. I think the ARPA-H programs, as they're starting to fund their new generation of accelerators, and the BARDA 2.0 accelerators. So I think leveraging the programmatic pieces, you can always still reach out to the faculty, but before you start talking about terms and contracts and IP, make sure you engage the institution, because it'll just make it that much longer on the back end.
And just to add to that, again, talking about the people aspect, well, that's one of the things that we do as the PDCs, the Pediatric Device Consortia. It doesn't cost any money because we have those connections. We are in the hospitals. We have that Rolodex of experts that we know we probably can go to. I can tell you that Rolodex, and not anything against elderly people, but we know that the older ones are probably not as pliable as the younger ones. So we're looking for the younger ones. We're looking out for those that are probably not in leadership positions, because the ones in leadership positions are risk averse. They don't want to go to the new technologies and try it out. They'll let the younger ones do it. So those are some of the aspects that we have seen. I've also seen more physicians with engineering backgrounds. At Texas A&M, there's a new medical school that's for engineers. Engineers who usually have a BS degree, go into medical school and get a master's in engineering. Those are probably the ones who probably will be the most open to these type of partnerships. And again, these are really our partnerships. We can't do it without industry. Industry can't do it without us. It's a win-win for everybody.
Hi, my name is Lincoln Hunt. I'm actually in that situation where I'm an engineer applying to medical school right now. So just wanted to ask Anne specifically, what was that process like of working with industry as a physician going to school and going through that process? And how do you make those connections to, I'm especially interested in pediatrics, so how do you make those connections and move the field forward in that way?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was a new faculty member. So I think I was very fortunate that the connection had already been made between Dr. Ports and Dr. Byington, who was my direct mentor as a new faculty member. I did have a background in molecular biology, so similar to you. So I had a background that I could use for some of the diagnostics development, and then a very supportive department and division. But I think, as Chester and Juan have said, reaching out to some of those programs or the technology office to say that you're interested, to put yourself forward, to find out what companies are startups from the university that you end up going to. I think a lot of medical schools, certainly the University of Utah, has programs for innovation within their medical school or their undergraduate, which reach out to students to help them with ideas that they have or with getting hooked up with new companies.
I just want to emphasize Anne's point. For example, we have a neonatologist who's super interested in early stage technologies, and he approached me and said, "Hey, I know you run this program. Whenever something comes up, just let me know." And you better believe it. At least once every 6 months, I'm like, "Hey, here's a company that has an SBIR and they're looking for a site PI." Because there's also, even for us, it's like, all right, there's 100 neonatologists. Which one of them is going to be on this paper, or which one of them wants to be on this grant? So knowing that there are people interested makes our lives really easy. So it is never a burden to know that our faculty and staff are interested in innovation.
If I can add also one aspect, being an engineer, you probably know about capstone programs or senior engineering design programs. We've really capitalized on that. We know it's a great educational program that every accredited engineering school has to have, but we found that it's a great prototype development. So this is a physician, has an unmet need in their head, don't know what to do with it, go through a capstone program, work with those senior engineering students through an academic program, which can be long, but is a way to get a prototype developed, and then it's up to that physician to take it on afterwards after those students graduate. So that's an early partnership. It can go to later as well.
Okay, my name is Laura. I don't have very much experience with pediatric stuff, but I just was wondering for Owlet and FilmArray, how were you able to push past the clinical part of testing? Were you able to use adult testing, or eventually, as far as the FDA now, are they more open to seeing clinical data from various groups, or are they more open to testing with pediatrics?
I think one of the biggest keys there is having a partnership, right? Is not trying to do it in a vacuum and then trying to force it on the FDA or work around it, but actually seeing that partnership. And so with the FDA's device, with the Owlet device, and working with the FDA, we did use that adult accuracy data to show with the blood gas. We also used NICU data from infants in the NICU, and then we went into homes and just compared to other reference oximeters out there. Now that's not considered gold standard, but by combining it with all the other pieces of data and working together with the FDA to identify the gaps, filling that gap in a way that everybody was comfortable with was the way we were able to work through those differences and get something that they trusted was accurate, that we had confidence was accurate, that they were willing to approve.
And the FDA does have guidances on this about extrapolation of data for pediatric devices, so I encourage you to look at that, which is great. You don't have to repeat studies for data that may already be there.
But always do a pre-sub. Sit down with the FDA, create an evidence generation plan that talks about what populations, what data sources, and what analyses, and then work with that together. Because the last thing you want to do is to spend $2.5 million on a clinical trial and come back to the FDA and be like, no, go do it again.
Okay, Calvin.
And one other thing, make sure that you know the first name of your reviewer at FDA and what they like for dinner. That would help. So let's give our panel a round of applause. This has been very fascinating.